Mom, do not hang up. I need to hear exactly what happens next. Eleanor Brooks pressed the phone closer to her ear as she sat on a concrete bench outside the neighborhood pharmacy, her breathing slower now, but still uneven from the confusion of the last few minutes. At 72, she had learned how to keep her voice steady even when the people around her were not listening. A paper grocery bag had tipped over beside her shoes. A loaf of bread, a box of tea, and a birthday card lay scattered across the pavement beneath the bright white parking lot lights. 10 feet away, Sergeant Wade Callahan stood beside his patrol car with his arms folded, watching her as if the phone call were an inconvenience. Officer Mason Pike remained closer to the pharmacy entrance, his body camera still recording, his expression far less certain than it had been when they arrived. Eleanor looked toward the receipt lying flat on the hood of the patrol car. It had been there for several minutes. Every item matched. The store manager had confirmed the purchase. The transaction had cleared. Nothing was missing. Yet Eleanor was still sitting outside instead of driving home. "Are there cameras on?" the man on the phone asked. Eleanor looked first at Mason, then at Wade. "Yes." Wade gave a short laugh. "Call whoever you want, ma'am. It does not change anything." The voice on the phone went quiet for half a second. "Who said that?" Eleanor answered softly. "Sergeant Callahan." Wade looked at her. "You giving him my name now?" Eleanor did not respond to the tone. He asked. "Put me on speaker," the voice said. Eleanor hesitated only long enough to tap the screen. The parking lot filled with the quiet electronic sound of the call. "Sergeant Callahan," the man said, calm and precise. "Has the store confirmed the receipt?" Wade's expression changed slightly. "Who is this?" "Her son." Wade glanced toward Mason as if expecting him to share the amusement. Mason did not. The man continued. "Has the receipt been confirmed?" Wade looked toward the pharmacy doors. "The manager says the items were paid for." "Has my mother been accused of taking anything that is not listed on that receipt?" Another pause. "Not at this point." Eleanor looked down at her hands. There it was. The question underneath every question. The receipt had matched. The transaction had matched. The store manager had confirmed it. Still, she had been stopped, questioned, told to wait, and treated as if every answer created a reason for one more question. The voice on the phone remained steady. "Then what is the reason she is still being detained?" Wade's jaw tightened. "I am conducting an investigation." "Into what?" Mason looked toward the receipt on the hood. He had been asking himself the same thing. Wade answered. "There were concerns about her behavior." Eleanor raised her eyes. "My behavior was asking why you wanted to search my handbag after the store confirmed I paid." Wade turned toward her. "You refused to cooperate." "I refused to search. I did not refuse to answer your questions." Mason shifted his weight. A few minutes earlier, he had watched the moment the encounter changed. Eleanor had asked for a supervisor. Wade had stepped closer. The grocery bag had fallen. Eleanor had lost her balance and sat down hard on the bench before Mason told Wade to slow down. There had been no dramatic struggle, no shouting crowd. Only a sudden silence and the uncomfortable realization that the original reason for the police response had already disappeared. The voice on the speaker asked, "Officer Pike, are you still there?" Mason looked toward Eleanor's phone. "Yes, sir. Please make sure both cameras stay on." Wade's eyes narrowed. "You sound like you know a lot about procedure." The man answered, "I know enough to ask for a complete record." Wade stepped toward the patrol car. "Like I said, call whoever you want." Eleanor looked at the scattered groceries, then at the receipt that had never moved from the hood. Her son's voice came through the speaker again, softer now. "Mom, stay where you are. I am coming to you." Wade shook his head as though the statement meant nothing. Mason looked at him differently. Neither officer knew who was on the way. Eleanor did, and she knew something even more important. Her son was not coming to threaten anyone. He was coming because the truth had already been sitting in plain sight, and someone needed to make sure nobody moved it. 1 hour earlier, Eleanor Brooks had been standing in her kitchen folding a grocery list into the small leather purse she carried almost everywhere. At 72, she had a system for nearly everything. Bills went into one drawer. Medical papers went into another. Receipts went into a cream-colored envelope inside her handbag because, as she liked to tell her son, memory was useful, but paper was better. The house around her was quiet, the same modest Virginia home she had lived in for more than 20 years, with family photographs lining the hallway and a row of old library awards gathering dust on a shelf near the dining room. Eleanor had spent 3 decades as a public school librarian before retiring. She still read 2 newspapers every morning, still corrected people when they returned books with folded pages, and still believed that most confusion could be solved if everyone slowed down long enough to look at the facts. Her phone rang while she was checking whether she had remembered the coupon for tea. Marcus Brooks appeared on the screen. Eleanor smiled before answering. "You are calling early. That means you want something." Marcus laughed. "I want to know whether you remembered Sunday breakfast." "I remembered. The question is whether you will arrive before the coffee gets cold." "I am always on time." Eleanor looked toward the kitchen clock. "That is not how your mother remembers it." Marcus had been that way since he was a boy, always moving quickly, always promising he had more time than the clock said he did. His life had changed over the years, but that part had not. Eleanor knew his work with the army was demanding. She knew there were details he could not discuss. She had learned long ago not to ask questions he was not allowed to answer. To her, none of that changed the fact that he was still the son who forgot to bring containers home after Sunday dinner. "Did you pick up your prescription?" Marcus asked. "That is why I am going out. And you are not carrying 3 bags at once this time?" Eleanor smiled. "You worry too much. That is my job." "No, your job is something else entirely. Worrying about me is your hobby." He laughed again. They spoke for another minute about Sunday breakfast, her neighbor's new puppy, and a birthday card Eleanor needed to buy for an old friend. Before hanging up, Marcus said, "Call me when you get home. I am going to the pharmacy, not crossing the country." Still, Eleanor shook her head, amused. "Goodbye, Marcus." She slipped the phone into her handbag beside the receipt envelope. An old photograph rested in the inner pocket, its edges softened from years of handling. Marcus stood in the picture much younger, wearing an army uniform beside Eleanor at a family cookout, both of them smiling into summer sunlight. Eleanor rarely showed it to anyone. It was not there to impress people. It was there because she missed that version of her son sometimes, the one who still looked embarrassed when she kissed his cheek in front of relatives. The drive to the neighborhood pharmacy took less than 15 minutes. Eleanor parked near the entrance, locked her sedan, and walked inside beneath bright fluorescent lights. The store was busy but calm. She collected her prescription, added bread, tea, a small box of cookies, and the birthday card to her basket, then waited in line behind a father trying to keep 2 children from touching every candy bar near the register. When it was her turn, the cashier scanned each item. Eleanor paid with her credit card, took the printed receipt, checked the total out of habit, and slid the receipt into the cream-colored envelope. She thanked the cashier and walked toward the exit carrying 1 paper bag. As she passed through the security sensors, an electronic alarm sounded behind her. Eleanor stopped immediately and turned around. A store employee looked up from the counter. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Eleanor raised the bag slightly and said, "Would you like to check the receipt?" She had no idea that this simple offer would answer the question almost immediately. She also had no idea that, within minutes, one officer would stop listening to the answer. Across town, Sergeant Wade Callahan began his evening shift with the confidence of a man who believed. Experience had taught him how to see what other people missed. He was 40 years old, white, broad-shouldered, and careful about the details of his uniform. Badge polished, radio checked, body camera secured at the center of his chest. His junior partner, Officer Mason Pike, 28, followed the same routine beside him in the station parking lot while the last light of day faded over the row of patrol cars. Mason respected Wade. Most younger officers did. Wade had been on the job long enough to recognize patterns quickly, and he rarely hesitated when making decisions. That certainty was useful when facts were incomplete. The problem, Mason had begun to notice, was what happened after the facts arrived. Wade closed the patrol car door and looked toward him. "You know what paperwork tells you?" he asked. Mason glanced over. "What people wrote down." Wade gave a small smile. "What people want you to see. Instinct tells you the rest." Mason had heard variations of the same lesson before. He nodded, though not because he fully agreed. Instinct can be wrong. Wade looked at him for a second. "That is why you learn to trust the right instincts." They pulled out of the station just after 6 in the evening. The first calls were ordinary. A minor parking dispute. A driver locked out of his car. A report of teenagers setting off small fireworks in an empty field, already gone by the time the officers arrived. Wade handled each situation efficiently, speaking with the practiced tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mason watched and learned. He also noticed how quickly Wade formed conclusions about people from posture, clothing, tone of voice, and whether they answered questions without hesitation. Shortly before 7, a message appeared on their in-car computer reminding officers that all public encounters involving detention or searches required complete documentation and active body cameras. Mason read it aloud. Wade barely glanced at the screen. Another reminder written by someone who has not stood roadside at midnight. Mason looked toward him. Still applies. Wade tapped the steering wheel. Of course it applies. A few minutes later, dispatch sent them toward a neighborhood pharmacy. The call was simple. Store security alarm. Elderly woman stopped near exit. Possible merchandise concern. No threat. No confirmed theft. Wade turned the patrol car toward the shopping center. Probably nothing, Mason said. Maybe, Wade answered. But alarms go off for a reason. When they arrived, Eleanor Brooks was standing just inside the pharmacy entrance with a paper bag in one hand and her handbag over the other arm. A store employee stood nearby holding the printed receipt Eleanor had already offered. She looked more patient than nervous. Wade and Mason entered beneath the bright fluorescent lights. Evening, Wade said. What happened? The employee pointed toward the security sensors. Alarm went off when she walked through. Eleanor held out the receipt envelope. I paid for everything. The cashier can confirm it. Mason took the receipt and compared it with the items in the bag. Bread, tea, cookies, birthday card, prescription receipt attached separately. Everything matched. The cashier at the register looked over and nodded. Yes, she paid. I checked her out. Mason turned toward Wade. Looks good. That should have been the end. Wade looked at Eleanor instead. What card did you use? Eleanor blinked. My credit card. Can I see it? She looked at him carefully. Why? Wade's expression changed only slightly. Because I am verifying the purchase. Eleanor pointed toward the receipt in Mason's hand. The store already verified the purchase. Mason looked down at the paper. The transaction number matched the register record. The cashier confirmed it again. Wade did not move. Ma'am, if everything is legitimate, this should only take a minute. Eleanor's voice stayed calm. Then tell me what is still in question. Mason looked from her to Wade. The alarm had been checked. The items had been checked. The cashier had confirmed payment. But Wade was no longer investigating the alarm. He was investigating Eleanor. And Mason could not yet explain why. Wade Callahan took the receipt from Mason Pike and read it himself, slowly, even though every item had already been matched. The pharmacy cashier stood behind the register watching with growing confusion while Eleanor Brooks remained near the entrance holding her handbag against her side. Bread, tea, cookies, birthday card, Wade said, glancing into the paper bag. And the prescription was processed separately? The cashier nodded. Yes, sir. Everything was paid for. Wade looked toward Eleanor. Whose credit card did you use? Eleanor's expression tightened slightly. Mine. Can you prove that? She looked at the receipt, then at him. The transaction has already been confirmed. Wade did not answer. Instead, he gestured toward the shopping center parking lot. Let us step outside for a minute. Mason looked at him. The store says there is no missing merchandise. Wade gave him a brief glance. I heard them. Eleanor remained where she was. Am I required to go outside? Wade's tone became firmer. Ma'am, I am trying to resolve this. Eleanor looked toward the cashier. It sounds resolved. The cashier nodded uncertainly. As far as the store is concerned, yes. For a moment, silence settled beneath the bright fluorescent lights. Mason watched Wade's face. He had seen this expression before. The look Wade got when someone challenged the direction of an encounter after he had decided where it should go. We can finish outside, Wade said. Eleanor did not argue further. She walked through the doors with Mason beside her and Wade a few steps behind. Evening had fully settled over the shopping center. Parking lot lights cast pale circles across the pavement. Wade placed the receipt flat on the hood of the patrol car and pointed to Eleanor's handbag. I would like to take a look inside. Eleanor stopped. Why? To make sure there is nothing else from the store. Mason looked toward him. The manager already confirmed the items. Wade kept his eyes on Eleanor. This is quicker if you cooperate. Eleanor's voice stayed measured. I have cooperated. I stopped when the alarm sounded. I gave the receipt. The cashier confirmed the purchase. Officer Pike checked every item. She looked at the receipt lying between them. What specific fact makes you think there is something in my handbag? Wade folded his arms. People act differently when they know they are being watched. Eleanor gave him a long look. I am 72 years old. I was walking to my car with bread and tea. Wade's expression did not change. You also seem nervous. An alarm sounded behind me, and then 2 police officers arrived. Would you prefer I be cheerful? Mason looked down, hiding the reaction on his face. Wade noticed anyway. Officer Pike, check with the manager again. Mason returned to the entrance while Eleanor waited beside the patrol car. The receipt did not move. 2 minutes later, Mason came back with the store manager, who carried a small tablet showing the transaction record. We checked the register, the manager said. The payment went through at 6:52. Every item in the bag is on the receipt. We are not reporting a theft. Mason turned toward Wade. That confirms it. Wade looked at the tablet, then at Eleanor. Why were you leaving so quickly? Eleanor almost laughed, but there was no humor in her face. Because I had finished shopping. You did not stop until the alarm sounded. That is what alarms are for. Mason shifted closer to the patrol car. The answer was obvious. Wade looked again at the handbag. I still want consent to search that bag. Eleanor's eyes hardened. No, Wade tilted his head. No. I do not consent to a search without a reason. The store manager glanced toward Mason. Mason looked at the body camera on Wade's chest, then at his own. Eleanor continued. If you believe I committed an offense, tell me what it is. If not, I would like to leave. Wade stared at her for several seconds. The receipt remained on the hood between them, perfectly still under the parking lot light. The alarm had raised a question. The cashier had answered it. The manager had answered it again. The transaction record had answered it a third time. But Wade had stopped looking for an answer. He was looking for a reason to keep asking. Eleanor Brooks kept her eyes on the receipt lying across the patrol car hood while Sergeant Wade Callahan waited for her to change her answer. She did not. I do not consent to a search without a reason, she repeated. Wade stepped closer, not touching her, but narrowing the space between them. You are making this harder than it needs to be. Eleanor looked at him. No. I am asking you to explain why it needs to continue at all. Mason Pike stood several feet away, the store manager still beside him, both body cameras active under the bright parking lot lights. The manager cleared his throat. Sergeant, the store is not reporting a theft. Wade glanced toward him. I understand. Then she is free to go from our perspective. Eleanor looked back at Wade. Am I free to leave? Wade did not answer immediately. That pause changed the air around them. Mason noticed it. So did Eleanor. Not yet, Wade finally said. Why? Because I am still investigating. What? Wade's expression hardened. Your behavior. Eleanor's hands remained visible at her sides. My behavior was asking whether I had to let you search my handbag after the store confirmed I paid. You became argumentative. I became specific. Mason shifted his weight. The difference mattered. Wade reached toward Eleanor's arm as if to guide her away from the patrol car. Eleanor stepped back instinctively. Please do not move me without telling me why. The grocery bag hanging from her wrist slipped as she adjusted her balance. Bread, tea, cookies, and the birthday card spilled onto the pavement. Eleanor lost her footing for a moment and sat down heavily on the concrete bench behind her. Mason reacted immediately. Sergeant, hold on. Wade stopped. The parking lot went quiet around them. A woman walking toward the pharmacy slowed and looked over. The store manager stared at the items scattered beside Eleanor's shoes. No one shouted. No one ran. The only sounds were the faint traffic from the road, the pharmacy doors opening behind them, and Eleanor drawing one slow breath after another. Mason moved closer. Ma'am, are you all right? Eleanor nodded once. I am sitting down. That is all. Wade looked toward the receipt on the hood, then back at her. You pulled away. Eleanor raised her eyes. I stepped back because you reached for me after refusing to explain why I was still being held here. Mason looked toward Wade. The purchase was confirmed. Wade's jaw tightened. I know. The manager says there is no theft complaint. I know. Eleanor's voice remained low. Then what fact are you still trying to verify? Wade said nothing. The question hung there longer than any of his earlier ones. Mason glanced at his body camera. It had recorded the manager's confirmation. It had recorded the receipt. It had recorded Eleanor's refusal to consent to a search. It had recorded Wade say she could not leave. And now it was recording the silence after she asked what crime, what missing item, What unresolved fact justified keeping her there? Eleanor reached slowly toward her handbag. Wade's attention sharpened. What are you doing? Getting my phone. Why? I am calling my son. Wade gave a short breath through his nose. That is not going to change the situation. Eleanor looked at him. It may not, but I would like someone to know where I am. Mason said quietly. Let her make the call. Wade glanced at him. For the first time that evening, Mason did not look away. Eleanor removed her phone, found Marcus's name, and pressed call. It rang once, twice. Then a calm male voice answered. Mom. Eleanor looked at the receipt still lying untouched on the hood. Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. Marcus Brooks heard something in his mother's voice that erased every other thought in his head. He was still inside an army facility several miles away, wearing civilian training clothes after finishing the day's work, when Eleanor said, Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. He stopped walking. Are you safe? I am sitting outside the pharmacy. Are you hurt? Eleanor looked down at the groceries scattered near her shoes. I am all right. I lost my balance when the officer reached toward me. Marcus closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. His voice stayed calm. Do not hang up. Tell me exactly who is there. Eleanor looked toward Wade Callahan. Sergeant Wade Callahan. Officer Mason Pike. The store manager is here too. Marcus reached for a notebook from a nearby table. Are there body cameras on? Eleanor looked at Mason. Mason nodded. Yes, she said. Marcus wrote the names down. Is there an incident number? Not yet. Wade gave a short, impatient laugh from several feet away. She does not need to turn this into a courtroom. Marcus heard him. Mom, put me on speaker. Eleanor tapped the screen and placed the phone on the bench beside her. Marcus's voice came through clearly. Sergeant Callahan, has the store confirmed my mother's receipt? Wade looked toward the phone. Who is this? Her son. Wade glanced at Mason. Your mother was involved in a security alarm. Marcus replied, I understand. Has the store confirmed the receipt? Wade hesitated. Yes. Has the manager reported any unpaid merchandise? No. Has anyone accused her of taking an item not listed on the receipt? Wade's face tightened. Not specifically. Marcus wrote another note. Then what is the factual reason she is still being detained? Wade stepped closer to the bench. I do not discuss police decisions with people over the phone. Marcus's tone did not change. Then state the reason to my mother. Eleanor looked up at Wade. Silence. Mason looked at the receipt still resting on the patrol car hood. Marcus continued. Officer Pike, are you present? Mason answered carefully. Yes, sir. Did you personally confirm the receipt? Yes. Did the manager confirm the transaction? Yes. Did you see any unpaid merchandise? Mason looked toward Wade, then back at Eleanor. No, the parking lot became very still. Wade folded his arms. This is not helping. Marcus answered. I am not trying to help you. I am trying to understand the record. Wade's eyes narrowed. And what exactly do you do that makes you think you understand police procedure? Marcus looked through the glass doors of the facility toward the darkening sky outside. That is not relevant. Wade gave a humorless smile. Convenient. Marcus continued. What matters is whether my mother is free to leave. Eleanor watched Wade. He did not answer immediately. Mason spoke first. Sergeant, I think we need a supervisor. Wade turned toward him. I did not ask what you think. Mason held his gaze this time. The store cleared the purchase. The manager says there is no theft complaint. She asked for a supervisor. I think we should get one. Marcus heard every word. Officer Pike, please make sure that request is documented. Wade looked toward Mason's body camera, then back toward the phone. You are really enjoying this, are you? Marcus's voice stayed flat. No, Sergeant. My mother is 72 years old and sitting outside a pharmacy after the store confirmed she paid. There is nothing about that I enjoy. Eleanor lowered her eyes. For the first time since the encounter began, Wade had no immediate reply. Marcus picked up his car keys. Mom, stay where you are. Keep the phone on. I am coming to you. Wade shook his head. Call whoever you want. It does not change anything. Marcus paused at the facility door. You are right about one thing, Sergeant. Who I am should not change anything. Then he ended the sentence before saying more. Mason looked at Eleanor, then at Wade. He did not know who Marcus was. Wade did not know either. But Marcus did know exactly what mattered when he arrived. Not rank, not force, not intimidation. The receipt, the cameras, the timeline, and whether anyone in that parking lot still believed authority could replace an answer that had already been given. Marcus Brooks reached the pharmacy parking lot less than 15 minutes later in a dark civilian sport utility vehicle, wearing plain training clothes beneath a light jacket. No uniform, no visible rank, nothing that announced what he did for a living. He parked 2 spaces away from the patrol car and stepped out with the controlled pace of someone who had already decided that anger would not help his mother. Eleanor was still seated on the concrete bench. Her groceries had been gathered into a new paper bag by the store manager, but the receipt remained on the patrol car hood exactly where it had been. Mason Pike stood near her, body camera active. Wade Callahan was closer to the driver's side of the patrol car, arms folded, watching Marcus approach. "You the son?" Wade asked. Marcus stopped several feet away. "Yes." He looked first at Eleanor. "Mom." She gave him a small nod. "I am all right." Marcus did not touch Wade, did not raise his voice, and did not move closer than necessary. "Has a supervisor been requested?" Mason answered before Wade could. "Yes. Captain Mitchell is on the way." Wade looked at Mason with irritation. Marcus glanced toward the receipt. "That the original?" The manager nodded. "Yes. We confirmed everything was purchased." Marcus looked back at Wade. "Then I want to understand one thing. Why was she still being held after the store cleared the transaction?" Wade's expression hardened. "I already explained that there were concerns about her behavior." Marcus remained still. What behavior created a new offense after the original concern was resolved? Wade stared at him. "You ask a lot of questions. I am asking one." Eleanor watched her son carefully. She knew that tone. Not angry. Focused. Mason recognized it too. A few minutes later, headlights swept across the parking lot as another department vehicle pulled in. Captain Laura Mitchell stepped out, carrying a tablet and wearing the composed expression of someone who knew she had arrived at an encounter that needed to be slowed down before anyone explained it away. She introduced herself to Eleanor, then to Marcus, and asked Mason for a brief timeline. Mason looked once at Wade, then answered honestly. The alarm triggered. The receipt matched. The cashier confirmed payment. The manager checked the transaction and said there was no theft complaint. Sergeant Callahan requested consent to search her handbag. She declined and asked whether she was free to leave. He said not yet. Captain Mitchell looked toward Wade. And what was the basis for continuing the detention at that point? Wade opened his mouth, then glanced toward Marcus. She became argumentative. Marcus said nothing. Captain Mitchell did not look impressed. Argumentative is not a factual basis. Wade shifted his stance. There was more to it than that. Then we will identify it from the recordings. She turned toward Marcus. "Sir, I will need your name for the incident record." "Marcus Brooks." She entered it into the tablet, then paused. "Identification, please." Marcus handed her a military identification card without ceremony. Mitchell looked at it, then at him again. Her expression changed slightly, not because she was afraid, but because she understood the level of discipline and responsibility associated with the man standing in front of her. "United States Army?" she asked. "Yes." "Special Operations?" Marcus gave a small nod. Wade looked between them. "What unit?" Marcus did not answer immediately. Captain Mitchell looked again at the information, then lowered the tablet. "Sergeant, that is not relevant to the detention." Wade's posture shifted anyway. His tone softened when he spoke to Eleanor. "Ma'am, maybe we can clear this up without making it bigger than it needs to be." Marcus noticed the change instantly. So did Mason. Eleanor did too. Marcus looked at Wade for several seconds before speaking. "Do not treat her differently because you know who I am now." The parking lot went still. "Explain why you treated her differently before you knew." Wade's face tightened. Captain Mitchell looked toward the body camera on his chest, then at the receipt on the hood. Marcus continued. "My job has nothing to do with my mother's right to be treated lawfully. If the facts supported what happened here, the record will show it. If they did not, the record will show that too." Mitchell gave a small nod. Mason looked down, then back up with more resolve than before. Wade said nothing. For the first time that evening, the most powerful person in the parking lot was not the man with the badge or the man connected to Delta Force. It was the evidence that had been sitting under the parking lot light from the very beginning. Captain Laura Mitchell did not argue with Wade Callahan in the parking lot. She did something more dangerous to a bad explanation. She asked for the timeline. "Start from the beginning," she told Mason Pike. Mason looked toward the pharmacy entrance, then at Eleanor Brooks, then finally at Wade. The security alarm sounded when Mrs. Brooks exited. She stopped voluntarily. The cashier confirmed the purchase. I checked the receipt against the items. Everything matched. Mitchell tapped the screen of her tablet. Then what? Mason swallowed. The manager verified the transaction in the store system. No unpaid merchandise. No theft complaint. Wade shifted. Beside the patrol car, there were still behavioral concerns. Mitchell looked at him. We will get to that. Her voice remained calm. Officer Pike, continue. Mason glanced at the receipt, still resting on the hood. Sergeant Callahan asked to search her handbag. She declined consent. She asked if she was free to leave. He said not yet. Marcus Brooks stood beside his mother, silent now, listening. He had asked every question he needed to ask. Eleanor sat upright on the bench, one hand resting over the other, her face tired but composed. Mitchell looked toward the body camera on Wade's chest. Both cameras were active the entire time. Mason nodded. Yes, Captain. Good. Preserve them. Wade frowned. That happens automatically. Mitchell met his eyes. I am instructing you anyway. The store manager stepped forward and held up the tablet showing the transaction. Captain, I can also provide our security footage. It covers the register, the exit, and part of the parking lot. Mitchell nodded. Please preserve that too. A woman who had paused near the pharmacy doors raised her hand slightly. I recorded some of what happened outside. Mitchell took her information without comment. One record became 3, then 4. The receipt, the store system, the body cameras, the bystander video. Wade looked at the patrol car as if all of it had appeared suddenly, but none of it had. The evidence had been accumulating from the first minute. Marcus bent slightly toward Eleanor. Do you want to go home? She looked at Mitchell. Am I free to leave? Mitchell answered immediately. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor nodded. Then I would like to go home after I give you my information. Wade opened his mouth. Mitchell stopped him with a glance. Sergeant, you are done with direct contact for the remainder of this incident. Mason looked at Wade, then away. The statement was administrative, not dramatic, but it landed hard. Less than an hour later, inside the station, Mitchell sat with both officers in separate rooms while the first sections of body camera footage were reviewed. The video was clear. Eleanor stopping after the alarm. Eleanor offering the receipt. Mason checking every item. The cashier confirming payment. The manager confirming the transaction. Then Wade asking for the credit card. Asking about her behavior. Asking for the handbag. Eleanor declining. Eleanor asking to leave. Wade saying no. Mitchell paused the footage. Officer Pike, she said during his interview. When did you first believe there was no longer a factual basis to keep questioning her? Mason stared at the table. After the manager confirmed the transaction. Mitchell waited. Mason corrected himself. Honestly, probably before that. After the cashier confirmed the receipt and the items matched. Did you tell Sergeant Callahan? Not clearly enough. Why not? Mason took a long breath. Because he was my sergeant. Mitchell let the answer sit. That explains your hesitation. It does not excuse it. Mason nodded. In another room, Wade watched the same footage and kept returning to the same phrase. She was being argumentative. Mitchell asked one question. What fact did her argument change? Wade had no answer. By midnight, professional standards had been notified. Wade was reassigned away from public-facing patrol duties pending review. The next morning, an analyst pulled prior complaints associated with his name. Most had been closed individually, but placed side by side. Several shared a familiar pattern. An initial reason for suspicion, evidence resolving that reason, then continued questioning because the person's reaction itself became the new justification. Marcus never requested Wade be arrested. He never mentioned his unit again. He asked only that his mother's statement be taken, all footage preserved, and the review remain independent. The most serious consequence did not come from Delta Force. It came from something Wade had trusted less than instinct. A pattern written in records he could no longer explain away. 3 weeks later, Eleanor Brooks sat across from Marcus in a small neighborhood diner on a quiet Sunday morning, a white coffee mug warming both hands while sunlight moved slowly across the window beside them. Marcus had arrived 8 minutes late. Eleanor noticed immediately. I thought soldiers were supposed to understand time, she said. Marcus smiled as he slid into the booth. Traffic. That is what you said when you were 17. And it was probably true then too. Eleanor shook her head, but the smile stayed. For the first time since the pharmacy incident, the morning felt completely ordinary. Plates clinked behind the counter. A waitress carried pancakes to a family near the door. Someone at the far end of the diner laughed too loudly at something on a phone. Marcus ordered coffee and eggs. Eleanor ordered the same breakfast she always ordered: toast, fruit, and more coffee than her doctor would approve of. They did not begin by talking about the review. That was intentional. Marcus asked about her neighbor's puppy. Eleanor asked whether he had remembered to return the storage containers from the previous Sunday. He had not. Only after their food arrived did Eleanor mention the letter she had received from the police department. The review was still open, but several interim decisions had already been made. Wade Callahan remained removed from public-facing patrol duties while Professional Standards completed its examination of the pharmacy encounter and the earlier complaints connected to his name. The department had begun comparing those complaints for repeated patterns rather than reviewing each one in isolation. Mason Pike had provided a complete statement and was attending intervention training focused on the responsibility of junior officers to speak clearly when a detention no longer had a factual basis. Captain Laura Mitchell had also issued interim guidance requiring officers to document the specific reason for continuing an encounter after the original concern had been resolved. Marcus listened without interrupting. "How do you feel about it?" he asked when Eleanor finished. She spread a little jam across her toast. "I feel like people are finally reading the whole page instead of one sentence." Marcus smiled faintly. "That sounds like something a librarian would say. Libraries teach you useful things." He took a sip of coffee. "Do you want Wade fired?" Eleanor looked out the window for a moment before answering. "I want the review to be honest." "That is not the same." "Answer. It is the only answer I need." She turned back to him. "If the facts support discipline, then there should be discipline. If they support something else, then that should be explained too." Marcus nodded. He had expected nothing less from her, but hearing it still mattered. Eleanor folded her napkin carefully. "You know what scared me most that night?" Marcus's expression changed. "Wade." She shook her head. "No, he waited." "Mason." Marcus frowned slightly. "Because he did not stop it sooner? Because he knew something was wrong before he said it clearly." Eleanor looked down at her coffee. "That is the part people do not talk about enough. Sometimes the person doing the wrong thing is obvious. The harder question is what everyone else does after they recognize it." Marcus sat quietly. Eleanor continued. "Mason was younger. Wade was his sergeant. I understand why that was difficult. But difficult is not the same as impossible." Marcus looked toward the window. Outside, cars moved slowly through the parking lot, ordinary people going about an ordinary Sunday. Eleanor reached across the table and touched his hand. "You asked me that night whether the cameras were recording. That mattered. But cameras only preserve choices. People still have to make them." Marcus nodded. "Mason eventually did." "Yes, and that matters too." The waitress returned with more coffee. Eleanor thanked her, waited until she left, then looked at her son with the calm certainty Marcus had known all his life. Strength is not only what you stop after it happens. Sometimes strength is what you refuse to stand beside while it is happening. Marcus lowered his eyes for a second, then smiled. "You know, for someone who says she does not give speeches, you give a lot of speeches." Eleanor raised one eyebrow. "Eat your breakfast." He laughed. The conversation moved on. No revenge. No celebration. No dramatic victory. Just a mother and son finishing Sunday breakfast while, somewhere else, reports were being reviewed, footage was being preserved, and choices were being measured against facts. Marcus had spent his adult life learning how to remain calm under pressure. Eleanor had spent hers teaching children how to find truth on a page. In the end, neither of them needed force to change what happened next. The truth had already done the fighting for them.